What if the Pied Piper wasn't just a fairy tale? What if on a summer's day in 1284, an entire generation of children really walked out of Hamelin and never came back? The records are clear. A man in a cloak of colors appeared carrying a flute. First, he led the rats into the river. Then, when betrayed, he returned for the children. 130 vanished. The date was carved into the walls of Hamelin's church as if to anchor memory in stone. The rhyme we know is soft, almost playful. But history whispers something darker. Why would a town record such a horror?
Follow me now.
Why turn it into a story for children? What if the Piper was real, and the vanishing was not legend but truth? The year was 1284. Hamelin, a small German town pressed between river and forest, was drowning in vermin. Rats gnawed through grain-spread sickness and filled every street with their red eyes and sharp teeth. The people despaired until the stranger arrived. He was unlike anyone they had seen. A tall figure in a cloak streaked with colors, carrying a flute of strange design. He promised deliverance for a price. Desperate, the town agreed. And then, with a melody that shimmered like something not of this world, he walked the streets. The rats poured out hundreds, thousands, tumbling after him like shadows tied to sound. He led them to the Weser River, and there they drowned. The town was free. The bells rang. The people celebrated. But when the Piper returned for his payment, the council turned him away. No coin, no gratitude, and no betrayal. Days later, he came again. But this time, the song was different. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't furious. It was sweet. Sweet enough that the children heard. One by one, they followed. Out of their houses, through the streets, past the gates, into the forest. The records say 130. Some claim they vanished into a mountain that opened before them. Others, that they were swallowed by the earth. A few stories say 2 children returned, one blind, one mute, unable to describe what they had seen. But most accounts agree on one thing: the children of Hamelin never came back. The town was left in silence, a silence so deep that even the church carved the memory into stone. If Hamelin was only a name, the pattern would still feel unsettlingly familiar. In one place they called him the Piper. In another he wore a different mask, but the script was always the same. A sound that lured, a procession that followed, and a threshold that closed. In the north, the figure sits by the river. The Nook draws his bow across the strings, music so hypnotic that even stone would want to move. Children who lean too close are pulled beneath the water. In Celtic lands, music rises from burial mounds. Those who follow the tune vanish into the hill, and when they return, centuries may have passed. Along the Rhine, the Lorelei sings from the rocks, her voice pulling listeners to their deaths. In the Americas, La Llorona's cries lure children to the edge of the river. In Japan, the Namahage arrives not with melody, but with ritual shouts that frighten children into obedience. However the form changes, the first element is constant, a sound, or a call that overrides reason. The second element is the procession. In Hamelin, the children walked in lines behind the stranger. In Central Europe, people spoke of the wild hunt sweeping across the sky, dragging souls in its wake. In Celtic ballads, anyone who clasps the hand of a fairy is swept into their endless march. Among Slavic villages, elders warned children not to follow lines of lights in the forest. Those were processions of the dead, not of the living. Again, the shape repeats, small feet leaving their homes one after another, moving toward a place beyond reach. The third element is the closing of a threshold. In Hamelin, it was said to be a mountain that opened and then sealed shut. Elsewhere, it was a burial mound, a lake, or a cavern. The material changes: stone, water, earth, but the function remains a gateway to another world that does not allow return. Step across and time itself bends. A night inside could equal a lifetime outside. Beneath the surface, these stories carried warnings. They were not only lessons in obedience, they were ways of speaking about loss. A child drowned in a river becomes a tale of spirits in the water. A generation carried off by famine or disease becomes a story of fairies luring children into the hills. Entire communities uprooted and sent to distant lands become legends of disappearance. Myth softened memory, giving unbearable events a shape the living could pass down. Even music itself carried this double edge. In ritual, it opened doors, subdued beasts, or calmed gods. In legend, it came from the other side, a key to draw mortals into places they should never go. A melody could be lullaby or trap. Seen this way, the Piper of Hamelin does not stand alone. He stands among a long line of figures who lead the vulnerable away spirits by rivers, hunters, and the night sky voices from mounds and caverns. Each story speaks in the language of its land, but all of them circle the same fear: the disappearance of children. the fragility of the future, the memory of losses too great to name. And when we look back at Hamelin through this lens, a question stirs. What exactly was the story meant to protect against? Was it the forest, the river, the stranger, or something within the community itself? For many versions insist the root was betrayal, a promise broken, and punishment falling not on the betrayers but on the children. The melody, the march, the closing door. The pattern repeats across cultures, across centuries. And at the center of it all stand the children, always the children.
He's here!
The story of Hamelin has the rhythm of myth,
Piper has come
but unlike
for us.
most fairy tales, it has an anchor in time. The Church of Hamelin once bore an inscription. In the year of 1284, on the day of St. John and Paul, 130 children of Hamelin were led away by a piper and lost at the place of execution. The inscription has long since vanished, removed, weathered, or perhaps deliberately erased, but references survive in later chronicles. Town records, civic documents, even stained glass once carried the memory. That is the first unsettling detail. Unlike most legends, this one was not passed only by word of mouth. It was recorded in the matter-of-fact voice of history. Scholars have tried to peel back the layers. The first hypothesis is migration. In the late 13th and early 14th centuries, much of Central Europe was in upheaval. Lords and bishops sought to expand into the east toward the forests and plains of Transylvania, Pomerania, and Moravia. Colonists were recruited with promises of land and freedom from feudal dues. It is possible that Hamelin's lost children were not abducted but led away as settlers. The piper in this reading was not a sorcerer, but a recruiter, a man in strange clothes whose task was to gather young people to populate new frontiers. In a society where adulthood began earlier, children may have meant adolescents, those old enough to work but still considered the youth of the town. There is evidence to support this. Place names in Transylvania trace back to German towns. Some families in Eastern Europe still carry surnames echoing those of the Weser Valley. To the people left behind, however, the sudden disappearance of so many young lives may have felt like death. Migration, after all, is not reversible. Those who left often never returned. For the parents who watched them vanish down the road, the difference between settlement and abduction was thin. Myth offered a softer frame, better to believe they followed a piper into the mountain than to accept they were gone forever by human design. Another theory points to disease. The 13th century was marked by waves of plague, though the Black Death itself would strike later. Children were always the most vulnerable to epidemics of dysentery, smallpox, or ergot poisoning. If a sickness swept through Hamelin and claimed a generation, how could a community explain it to themselves? Instead of admitting that God or negligence had taken the young, they might have woven the story of a piper whose music lured them away. Death itself became personified, his flute a metaphor for the unseen call that led children into silence. Linked to this is the possibility of environmental catastrophe. The Weser River could flood, the surrounding hills could collapse. In folklore across Europe, sinkholes, landslides, and sudden earthfalls were often described as mountains opening to swallow the unwary. If a landslide took the lives of the young, the record they went into the mountain might be chillingly literal. Archaeological digs in the region have revealed mass graves from the period rows of juvenile skeletons, sometimes buried hastily without ceremony. Were they victims of disease, famine, or disaster? The bones remain silent, yet their silence is heavy. Still others suggest the explanation lies in social violence. The 13th century was not peaceful. Child crusades, though often exaggerated, did take place. Bands of youth marched under religious fervor and vanished into slavery, death, or disappearance. Some accounts describe young Germans recruited as mercenaries, their departure framed as opportunity, but remembered as loss. The piper could have been such a leader, his payment refused by the town, his revenge carried out by recruiting away their youth. In that case, the tale is not of sorcery, but of betrayal between generations, the elders saving their wealth, the young paying the price. Archaeology offers hints, but no certainty. In Hamelin itself, no definitive site has been uncovered that explains the disappearance. Yet in surrounding regions, inscriptions and graves echo the pattern. Records from Lüneburg speak of children lost in numbers. In Saxony, stories survive of youth caravans departing under mysterious leaders. Each is a fragment, but together they sketch a wider picture, a time when movement, loss, and memory wove into legend. And then there is the matter of the piper's clothing. Chroniclers described his cloak as striped, colorful, almost dazzling. To modernize, it recalls the costume of a jester or performer. Yet in medieval guild tradition, striped garments often marked outsiders, executioners, gravediggers, or wandering entertainers. Was the piper a stigmatized figure, someone already half-feared whose otherness made him the perfect vessel for blame? If so, then Hamelin's story carries not only memory, but scapegoating the stranger blamed for a loss no one could bear to face. Even the detail of music has archaeological resonance. In some medieval burials, flutes and pipes were placed alongside the dead, perhaps as tools to guide souls into the afterlife. Music was not entertainment, it was a ritual passage. If the piper led the children with song, perhaps the tale remembers a funerary rite transposed into narrative. The children did not march alive into the mountain, they were carried there in death, the piper.
I think I found something significant
Each
here.
explanation, migration, disease, disaster, violence, ritual, tries to settle the unease. Yet none is complete. Migration explains where they might have gone, but not why the church framed it as loss. Disease explains death, but not the imagery of music and betrayal. Disaster explains sudden absence, but not the date etched in stone. Violence explains motive, but not the persistence of the myth. Ritual explains symbolism, but not the cold precision of 130. The deeper one digs, the stranger the soil becomes. The number itself is too exact for legend, too round for accident. It is the kind of number written in a ledger, not sung in rhyme. The date, June 26th, was not a festival of rats or of tricksters. It was the feast of Saints John and Paul martyrs remembered for betrayal. Did the chronicler choose the date for symbolism, or did the event truly occur? Then we cannot know. Archaeologists, historians, folklorists, all circle the same void. There are bones inscriptions, fragments of glass. There are theories of colonization, pestilence, landslide, crusade. But when placed together, they do not close the gap, they widen it. For the story persists not because we know what happened, but because we do not. And so the piper lingers in both history and myth. He is migration and death, scapegoat and recruiter, sorcerer and psychopomp. He is the sound of something calling from the other side of memory, leading the young into a place from which no one returns. What science reveals is unsettling enough, entire generations lost to forces we can barely reconstruct. But what it cannot reveal may be worse. For the closer we look, the more we see the shape of absence itself, and emptiness carved into the record of a town that has never filled it. Strip away the literal, and what remains is the figure of the piper himself. He is more than a man in bright clothes. He is a vessel carrying the weight of meaning that the town could not put into plain words. His song is not only melody, it is a contract, a seduction, a punishment. One reading sees him as the embodiment of broken promises. The people of Hamelin agreed, then betrayed. The piper returned not with anger alone, but with justice twisted into cruelty. He punished the community not through its leaders, but through its children. This inversion, innocence paying for guilt, creates the moral sting that makes the tale unforgettable. The piper becomes the shadow cast by deceit, the reminder that every broken oath breeds a cost that someone somewhere must bear. Others see him as death personified. In medieval imagery, death was often depicted as a figure who leads a procession, pipe or drum in hand, summoning souls into the dance of death. The piper's melody fits that image too closely to ignore. He does not slaughter, he gathers. He does not force, he entices. His music is irresistible because death itself is irresistible. In this reading, the tale of Hamelin becomes a local version of the universal truth that one day all children follow a tune beyond the reach of their parents. The colors of his cloak may deepen the symbolism. Striped garments mark the outcast, the liminal figure who stood between worlds. Executioners wore stripes. So did jesters, messengers, and those set apart. The piper is liminal in every sense. Stranger and familiar, savior and destroyer, human and otherworldly. His colors are a signal of dissonance, of someone who does not belong. That strangeness made him both alluring and terrifying, an archetype of the outsider who arrives when the town is most desperate and leaves it shattered. The flute itself is another symbol, breath turned into music sound that shapes behavior without words. In folklore, instruments often bridge worlds. Orpheus's lyre, the fairy pipes, the shaman's drum. The flute does not argue or command it, bypasses reason. It speaks directly to the body, the feet, the heart. In the piper's hands, it becomes the symbol of seduction, of manipulation of the unseen forces that guide people toward their fate without their consent. And at the center of all of this is the child. Why children? Because they are the most vulnerable, but also because they are the most symbolic. They represent the future innocence continuity. To lose them is not only to suffer grief, it is to see a line severed, a tomorrow extinguished. By targeting the children, the piper becomes the embodiment of generational rupture. He erases not just lives, but hope itself. This is why the story lingers. It is not simply a tale of rats and betrayal, but a meditation on the fragility of continuity. Communities rise and fall, promises bind and break, but the true terror is the loss of what comes next, the silence of empty streets where children once played. The piper's symbolism also resonates with power and control. He is a reminder that charisma, whether through music, words, or ideology, can move crowds more effectively than force. Children followed him without chains. They followed because something within them was tuned to his song. That image still unsettles us, the idea that an entire generation could march willingly toward disappearance. It forces the question, what hidden melodies are we still following today, unaware of where they lead? And then there is the mountain, or the gate that closed behind them. It is more than a geographical feature. It is the symbol of the irreversible. Once crossed, it cannot be undone. It is death, migration, exile, catastrophe, any threshold that separates the living from the lost. The mountain is the wall between the world we know and the silence beyond. So the piper stands both inside and outside the tale. He is debt and vengeance, death and seduction, outsider and scapegoat. His music is history's memory reshaped into a melody children could understand, but adults could not forget. And perhaps that is why the story never died. Because every age, every culture recognizes the same figures, the one who arrives at the gate with a tune, the one who leads the future away, the one whose promise carries a cost no one sees until it is too late. And so, the piper walks out of Hamelin, his song fading into the hills. The children are gone, the town remains, and the record endures, etched once in stone, now in memory. Centuries have passed, and still no one can say for certain what happened that summer's day. But the pattern is older than Hamelin. A sound that calls, a procession that follows, a door that closes. We see it in myths, in rituals, in history's gaps where the young vanish and the elders are left to explain it away. The piper is not only one man. He is a shape that slips from culture to culture, century to century, wearing different names, but carrying the same silence behind him. Which leaves a question no inscription can answer. If the piper was real once, is he finished with us? Because music still has the power to lead. Promises still break. Outsiders still arrive with bright colors and irresistible voices. And communities still betray their young in ways too subtle to admit. So when you hear a tune at night, a melody with no source drifting under the door, tugging at the edges of your thoughts, will you recognize it? Will you know whether it's only in your mind, or whether something is waiting outside playing the same song it has always played? And if it is, who will be the first to follow this time? Perhaps the tale of Hamelin is less about rats or flutes, and more about us. Every culture dresses its fears in story. Some call it the piper, others the hunt, others the voices from water or stone. Beneath the names lies the same unease that communities can fail their young, that promises can shatter futures, that the line between protection and betrayal is far thinner than we want to believe. The piper becomes a mirror. In him, we see not only a stranger in stripes, but the patterns we still repeat. The tunes we follow today may not be played on flutes, but they move us all the same through voices that seduce ideologies, that lure illusions, that promise safety but demand silent obedience. We still gather in lines, we still march toward unknown gates, and the cost still falls heaviest on the smallest feet. Maybe that is why Hamelin's story endures. Because it whispers a truth that no one wants to name aloud, that the greatest danger to children is not monsters in the forest, but the failures of the world that raises them. And yet the question remains, if the piper once walked in Hamelin, if his song once emptied the streets of laughter, did he ever stop walking? Because melodies do not die. They change, their rhythm shift, their words hide in new instruments. Promises are still broken. Strangers still arrive with dazzling colors and voices too sweet to resist. And children, our future, are still the ones who follow first. So listen closely. If you ever hear a tune drifting at night, soft, insistent, almost familiar, will you know whether it belongs to memory, to myth, or to something still waiting outside your door? And if it does, who will be the first to follow this time?